Hello, my name is Michael Crabb, and on behalf of myself and Mary Ellen Foster, I want to welcome you along to the 2021 SICSA Pre-CHI Day. So the Pre-CHI Day for us this year is a little bit different from what we would traditionally do. We're doing everything online, and that's pretty much like everything else that's going on just now. The day is going to be split into two different parts. In the first part, we've curated together some different presentations from some of the SICSA affiliated authors that are presenting full papers at CHI this year. I really hope that you enjoy watching these along with us as we're doing this live in the YouTube format. The second is going to be a discussion session that we are going to be carrying out with the authors on how they have been carrying out their work over the year, some of the different challenges that they might have faced in actually putting together papers, and different lessons that they've learned along the way. And hopefully we'll find this beneficial for themselves and for you as well in reflecting on how we as a community can better support ourselves in going forward. I really hope that you enjoy participating in this event, and I do really look forward to meeting all of you in person, hopefully sooner rather than later. So without me babbling on a little bit too much, I will shut up and let you enjoy all of the CHI papers that we have on offer from Scotland this year. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Florian Mattis from the University of Glasgow, and it is my great pleasure today to present in behalf of my co-authors and PhD supervisors, Dr. Kami Vanyai and Dr. Mohamed Khamis, our work RepliQauth, validating the use of a lab-based virtual reality setup for evaluating authentication systems. We investigated the suitability of virtual reality as a testbed for usable security research, more specifically for authentication schemes. We aimed to understand to what extent results from a VR-based usability and security study match with the previously reported findings in the real-world study. Why would a researcher want to evaluate a system that is intended to be used in the real world in virtual reality? And I brought with me today some examples of study setups within the scope of usable security and privacy. Corresponding research studies often require a significant amount of hardware such as cameras, touchscreens, 3D printed prototype systems, just to name a few. And as a result, conducting such studies is often challenging and costly. And at this point, VR studies, using VR as a testbed for human-centered research, can be particularly helpful because they can reduce the costs of research involving physical components. They can also enable recruiting many and diverse participants, and they have the potential to reduce the need for face-to-face user studies. To explore how such VR studies can be applied for usable security research, we chose to study QAuth, a real-world authentication system for public displays. QAuth covers three input methods that are frequently used in security research, such as touch, mid-air, and eye gaze. And we replicated the original study setup and the authentication scheme fully in VR to then conduct a conceptual replication study and compare our findings to those reported in the real-world study. We conducted two user studies. A lab-based in-VR usability study where participants entered a set of pins with touch, mid-air, and eye gaze, and a remote non-immersive VR study where participants in the role of attackers observed authentications performed by an avatar in virtual reality. And this depicts the scenario where an attacker looks over the user's shoulder, which is also called shoulder surfing. When taking a look at our in-VR usability study, we found many similarities between our VR study and the real-world study. However, we also found that authentication with touch input took significantly longer in our virtual reality study. The other was found for eye gaze. Gaze-based interaction was significantly faster in our VR study compared to the original real-world study. The original work used a stationary eye tracker attached to the authentication system, and this likely resulted in the eye tracking quality being influenced by the user's height, distance to the display, and the ambient and lighting conditions in the real-world study. Eye gaze also resulted in significantly lower physical workload, less frustration, and less effort in our VR study compared to the real-world study. For the remote security study, participants' successful attack rates follow a similar pattern as in the original real-world study. Input with eye gaze was overall the most secure input method. Repeated video attacks on touch and mid-air resulted in a higher successful attack rate. This was not the case when attacking eye gaze, which is in line with the original real-world study. Overall, we showed through our study that observing a virtual avatar during authentications reveals insights about how resistant an authentication scheme and also the different input methods are against observations. To conclude, our research showed that the transferability of quantitative results from VR to the real world highly depends on how well reality and its limitations are emulated. VR studies are promising for usable security research, but, and I really want to emphasize this, they should not replace traditional research paradigms, but rather augment them. We as a research community just need to be very clear what we can and also what we should expect from evaluations that are conducted in, for example, the lab, fully in VR, online or in the field. Last but not least, I would like to end my talk with a quote by Garfinkel and Lipford. I strongly believe that VR studies, as presented in our work, have huge potential to augment existing research methodologies in usable security and privacy and help speed the discovery and adoption of usable and secure techniques and systems. Thanks a lot for listening, and please find more details about our work in our paper.
Hello, we're here at the Tokyo Edo Museum, and I am delighted to welcome you to our talk on proxemics and social interactions in an instrumented virtual reality workshop. This is work that I did with my colleagues Jay, Vino, Ayman, and Pablo at the University of Glasgow, BBC, and CWI. When we first started this work, we wanted to understand a little bit more about how an academic workshop could unfold in a virtual environment. And we used hubs, Mozilla Hubs, where I'm speaking to you from today, to actually create our workshop and deliver this event. We wanted to understand how the environment design, the virtual reality affordances, and the kind of design of the program could work to deliver this event. One of the interesting things about Mozilla Hubs is that because it's open source, we can actually instrument this with logging code to get a very high level of detailed tracking and instrumentation within the environment to do a quantitative analysis. We combined this with a qualitative analysis through interviews after the event to understand how the event worked and how the virtual environment worked as well. Using this data set, we were able to create a number of different visualizations, which you can see in the paper. But for example, this one, where we looked at Hall's proxemic zones, you can kind of see how we could evaluate how people maintained personal distance and how they stood next to each other in different parts of the event. So for example, here, comparing the keynote session to the breakout room, we can actually see a real difference in how people maintained their distance in the personal space and social space in these two different types of social activities. We could also generate visualizations like this one, where we see a heat map and a bird's eye view of the outdoor meetup space. And we can see things like how people use different parts of the space. So for example, this kind of pattern on the floor, which was a decal in the virtual environment here, which actually people avoided while they were walking around in the virtual space. And we can see how the design of the virtual environment actually changed the way how people moved through it and used the space. We had a few key takeaways that I wanted to highlight during this talk, but you can of course read the full analysis in our paper. But first, I wanted to highlight that proxemic interactions are congruent with those in physical environments, but VEs are actually not constrained by physics. So even though we could think about Hall's proxemic zones quantitatively, we also found a new dimension, for example, flying in the virtual environment, where we can actually have new ways of creating personal space in a virtual environment that aren't possible in the physical. We also wanted to highlight that our instrumented approach can provide insights into the effect of environment textures, shapes, and design. So we drew some inspiration from things like urban theory and urban space design, but we could also think about more creative ways of designing virtual environments with changing environments or automatically generating environments based on these quantitative results. And finally, that quantitative data can answer interesting questions on social behaviors, such as group formation, social translucence, and social cues. We were able to understand how some of these behaviors could be captured in a virtual environment and understood quantitatively to then have qualitative improvements in social interaction. One of the most exciting contributions as well is that all of the code, data, and the scripts that we use to analyze our results are available as an open source resource on GitHub. So you can see our code, our data, and all of how the visualizations were generated for this paper in that repository as part of this paper, and that's available in the digital library and on GitHub. So thank you very much for your time, and we are very happy to take questions. And of course, you can always contact us after this talk if you have additional questions. You can also find all of our open source resources here at our GitHub. Thank you.
Amazing, and 4 minutes and 45 seconds. Perfect.
Very well done. Brilliant.
Immersive Analytics is a young, quickly evolving research field that unites work in visualization, immersive technologies, and HCI. To help guide this new area, we present 17 key research challenges identified by a diverse group of international experts and based on a virtual workshop that we conducted at ACM CHI 2020.
In 2015, Immersive Analytics has been defined as to explore the applicability and development of emerging user interface technologies for creating more engaging and immersive experiences and seamless workflows for data analysis applications. Since then, the field has produced advances in a range of areas. For example, empirical studies investigate perception and interaction compared to more traditional displays. Interaction techniques are being investigated for tangible and haptic interfaces. Specific application areas are explored, many of which require visualizations to be situated within a real-world environment. Design and authoring tools now include tools for known programmers, and new commercial platforms bring immersive analytics to end users.
As CHI 2020 couldn't happen face-to-face, we decided to go ahead with a virtual workshop. We had 28 participants from the HCI and visualization communities. We met 4 times on Zoom over the course of 2 weeks and across 4 different time zones. After a series of inspiring lightning talks and asynchronous group work sessions, we split into work groups, and we have identified 4 topics and 17 challenges. The 4 topics were spatially situated data visualization, interacting with immersive analytics systems, collaborative analytics, and user scenarios and evaluation.
The first group of challenges relates to spatially situating data visualizations in our real-world surroundings. These include finding ways to accurately link existing data sources with relevant spatial locations and making use of semantic knowledge extracted from the environment. While there's a growing body of evidence that spatial interaction can improve sense-making, more work is needed to understand the benefits of spatially coupling data encodings with their physical reference. There's also a need to better understand the cognitive processes of analytics using augmented reality for data analysis tasks. And finally, the requirements of immersive applications for detailed user tracking and physiological data raises a number of ethical concerns that must be addressed.
Interacting with immersive analytics system is uniquely challenging in part because of the combination of novel multimodal input and output technologies. Consequently, the challenges are how can designers better map interaction modalities to the most appropriate human settings, such as proprioception. How to enable multisensory output, such as vibrations, as feedback for input. How to support the multiple kinds of transitions, for instance, from using desktops where users have expertise to immersive analytics environments, which may be novel and unfamiliar. And finally, how to support complex analysis tasks using rich multimodal combinations.
While the possibility to facilitate collaboration is one of the key benefits of immersive technology, there are still challenges to solve in order to design efficient systems. Such system would of course need to support different forms of collaboration, from close to loose, from formal presentation to informal discussion. They should also support as much as possible face-to-face communication cues like facial expressions and hand gestures, but also one that go beyond what we can do in face-to-face, like changing our own size or use laser pointers instead of fingers. Such collaboration could be done from a wide range of immersive devices like AR/VR headset, wall displays, or devices that have not been invented yet. It is then necessary to explore how we can translate communication cues done on one device for any other one, but also to explore how we can integrate this new device in current collaborative work practice and how we can assess them.
One theme that emerged in our workshops was on suitable scenarios for immersive analytics and developing methodologies for evaluating them. We defined 3 grand challenges as illustrated in the figure to the right. In defining application scenarios for immersive analytics, we address the challenge of identifying why certain scenarios lend themselves to immersive analytics, while others may not. The challenge understanding users and contexts for evaluation of immersive analytics addresses questions surrounding who the end users of immersive analytics systems are and where they perform their work. Finally, we considered instrumental to establish an evaluation framework for immersive analytics for defining what attributes we need to consider when evaluating system performance and how these can be measured.
We hope these challenges will inspire the growing immersive analytics community, encouraging new discussions and motivating researchers who are new to the field. Immersive analytics offers tremendous potential to extend and enhance our experiences with data, and addressing these grand challenges will enable us to realize new opportunities in this innovative interdisciplinary domain.
Hello, I'd like to talk to you today about our research titled Adaptive Subtitles, Preferences and Trade-offs in Real-Time Media Adaptation. My name is Benjamin Gorman from Bournemouth University, and this work was completed with my collaborators Michael Crabb from the University of Dundee and Michael Armstrong from BBC Research and Development. Subtitles or closed captions are a tool which help people understand media content. Subtitles are meant to have a positive impact when they're used within media, but sometimes their use can reduce the overall viewing experience. And this means that people might understand the content more, but they may become less immersed in the content due to the presence of subtitles. In this work, we question why the experience of watching subtitled content is constrained to a binary choice, when the content, context, and abilities of viewers differ significantly. What we mean by this is currently people can only turn on or off the subtitles, there's no other personalization that can take place. Our work had 2 main aims. The first was to understand how people currently interact with subtitled media content, and the second was to understand the trade-offs and challenges that exist when allowing for real-time personalization of subtitled media content. To begin to understand how people interact with subtitles, we first conducted an online questionnaire. Our questionnaire was completed by 102 participants who self-reported regularly watching what we call scripted media, and this was anything with a subtitle track that was pre-produced, outside of things like YouTube videos. Our questionnaire findings highlight that people interact with subtitles based on environmental factors, such as when or where they're watching, challenges in content such as poor production or bad audio, and personal factors such as when they're tired or if they have a hearing loss. A key area that was discussed by participants surrounded interacting with subtitles due to the challenges in understanding specific accents or actors and altering their usage based on specific content types, such as when they're watching a drama versus a quiz show. People use subtitles differently. To investigate the potential that offering real-time personalization of subtitles would have on these areas, we introduced a new subtitling approach in this paper called Adaptive Subtitles. Adaptive subtitles means that we propose that additional metadata is added to subtitle files, which is then used to create opportunities for further adaptation. This moves subtitles from a single object to a structured set of atomic elements. On this slide, I have an example of a current subtitle file. And essentially, a subtitle file is blocks of subtitles that appear under certain time blocks. What we've done as part of adaptive subtitles here is we've added a simple, almost like an HTML tag called a V tag around individual characters. So in this particular file I have on screen, there is 3 characters, and that means we can actually do adaptations based on those individual characters when they crop up further on within the content. We developed an implementation of this method to provide the viewer with specific control over which characters have subtitles enabled or disabled. And it was really composed of 2 main parts. One was a second screen-based remote, which I'm going to show you in a second, and the other was a web-based video player, and then these 2 systems communicated over a socket-based communication protocol. So I'm going to play this short video now and explain what's happening. So this was what we showed participants. They essentially could select different clips when they watched during the evaluation, and they could essentially tap on the images of the actors, and then that would enable or disable the subtitle. And the colours would correspond with the subtitles shown on the web video player. So I'm now going to show you an example of how this works in real time. So this is from a kind of comedy quiz panel type show.
I keep a spare front door key on my cat's collar. If I ever get locked out, I simply call my cat and he comes to my rescue.
Wow. What's the name of your cat, Sheila?
Stanley.
Could you do the call? How do you call Stanley?
So in that particular clip, I only turned on the subtitles for the 2 female speakers, and you saw when I triggered them on and off, they disappeared and appeared immediately, so it was a very real-time interactive system. The evaluation of adaptive subtitles comprised of a lab-based user study. Participants watched a selection of video clips while using the system, followed by a discussion with one of the researchers of their experience using each technique. And we recruited 19 participants who self-identified as turning on subtitles whilst watching media content at least once in the last 3 months to do this evaluation. Our evaluation findings led to these real-time media design considerations. The first is that you have to provide users with the ability to create granular adaptations to move between understanding content and being immersed in specific contexts. The second is to consider the onboarding of viewers to the content and the technology as separate elements. So that means that for every new show they watch, they have to be onboarded to who's in the show and who might they require subtitles for, and separately how the system works and how the technology works in general. And the third was to embrace the set and forget phenomenon. Adaptive subtitles looks like it has great promise, but it might have more promise over longer clips across longer form content. So thanks for watching. That was Adaptive Subtitles, the preferences and trade-offs in real-time media adaptation.
Hello, my name's Chris Elliston. I'm a researcher in design informatics at the University of Edinburgh. My co-authors and I are interested in how emerging forms of financial technology, or fintech, and new kinds of digital monies allow us to interact and relate to each other in new ways. And in particular, we're interested in programmable money, where rules and potentially values are embedded in the way that transactions are made. In this paper, we conceptualise and study an example of creative transactions. Now, creative transactions has a double meaning. It refers specifically to how we pay for creative work, like buying a ticket for a gig, tipping a busker, or purchasing a vinyl record. But it also refers generally to finding more creative ways to pay. And in the paper, we argue that studying how we pay for creative work, which is often very difficult to value, offers an excellent context to understand how and why we pay for things in the ways that we do. Some quick background. Theoretically, we draw on Viviana Zelazar's concept of special monies, which recognises there's considerable social meaning in how we practically pay for things. In contrast to an economic model where all monies are seen as the same, the special monies model realises that there's a plurality of different kinds of money, and each of these special monies is shaped by a particular set of cultural and social factors and are indeed qualitatively distinct. They can be designed differently for different social purposes. Now, this has been taken on in the field of HCI. Cow et al. Have extended this theory to describe special digital monies in the context of designing digital currencies and payments on social media apps. We use Cow et al.'s framework of transactional attributes to analyse a case study of creative transactions, and in so doing, develop new design proposals for more creative ways to pay. As an example, the paper offers a case study of 87 unconventional Kickstarter crowdfunding campaigns which were designed to break Kickstarter. These campaigns were specifically invited to push the boundaries and rules of how crowdfunding on Kickstarter is supposed to work, and they sought to engage backers in new ways. Building on Cow et al.'s work, we understood the many different pledges through which backers could support a project as forms of special digital monies. They have particular rules attached to them. In the paper, we describe how campaigns experimented with different kinds of pledges in order to build distinct relationships and experiences with backers in a way that goes far beyond a typical charitable donation. So creative transactions in these campaigns had various features. For some, the transaction was about creating a sense of membership or community building around a campaign. Others sought to engage backers quite directly in some sort of creative work. Other projects sought to create space for ambiguous rewards or outcomes, a story or narrative that would go alongside the campaign and was driven through transactions to support the project. Others viewed fundraising itself as a creative exercise. And finally, there were those that pursued alternative metrics rather than just trying to raise a certain amount of money in order to recognise the support and success of a project. For example, one podcast set a nominal goal with $42, but sought 1,000 backers as a broader aim for the project. They said, unlike any other Kickstarter, the victory condition here isn't dollars raised. The only metric that matters is backers. Kickstarter doesn't have an easy way of setting this up, so we're breaking it. Unless we get 1,000 backers in 30 days, this campaign will fail, and I'll get none of the money. So here, we can see campaigns using transactions to demonstrate a broad level of support rather than just aiming to reach a funding target. So these kinds of features suggest new ways for creative practitioners and companies to raise funds and solicit payment for creative work. But more broadly, our analysis of these campaigns provides some further ideas about designing more creative forms of payments and transactions, especially as we consider emerging currencies, fintech, and programmable money. And so we conclude our paper by offering a number of design provocations to stimulate further research and design on creative transactions. For example, we consider transactions that talk. How can transactions be used to express a preference or a vote? And what can data about our financial transactions really say about us? Or how could transactions creatively shape a project or outcome? What if transactions are no longer simply an exchange for a product, but folded into the whole experience of a service? What kinds of compelling stories, narratives, and trajectories can be designed into different kinds of transactions and different choices about the way we pay? And it's in this fashion that we see creative transactions as a rich context for designers and researchers to grapple with the challenges of emerging financial technologies. Thanks very much for watching, and we hope you enjoy reading the full paper.
Hi, and thanks for tuning in. This is Feeling Colors, investigating cross-model correspondences between 3D shapes, colors, and emotions. My name is Osama Mitatla, and my co-authors are Annan Lin, Meika Scheller, Fong Fong, and Michael Brooks. We're from the Department of Computer Science at the University of Bristol and the Department of Psychology at the University of Bath in the UK. So in this paper, we show evidence for cross-model correspondences between tangible objects, visual, color, and emotions. We ask people to feel 3D printed shapes and to assign a color and an emotion to their tangible experience. The work is grounded in cross-model correspondences. These are non-arbitrary perceptual associations between sensory stimuli. They've been extensively studied in areas such as cognitive science or experimental psychology, and numerous examples of cross-model interactions have been documented. We know, for example, that people often tend to associate larger objects with lower pitch sounds and smaller objects with higher pitch sounds. This particular cross-model correspondence could have arised from natural correlations of physical properties. For example, that larger objects resonate at a lower frequency and vice versa. But there are other types of cross-model correspondences that are more abstract, and they cannot easily be explained by physical properties. You can try this out for yourself right now. If I was to show you these two shapes on the screen, one angular and jagged shape like a shattered piece of shattered glass, another one is round like a cloud, and then I gave you two random labels, Booba and Kiki, and asked you to assign one label to each shape. Which one would you assign to which? So the majority of people would assign the label Kiki to the jagged shape and the label Booba to the round shape. And this is a famous visual linguistic cross-model correspondence that actually have been shown to hold across a range of age groups, cultures, and so on. So why is this relevant? In short, because in HCI we're interested in multisensory interaction. And it's not only increasingly feasible to incorporate more and more sensory modalities at the user interface, at user experiences, but it can also be more beneficial to do so. For example, we can improve immersion or engagement or accessibility. What cross-model correspondences tells us is that we ought to be careful and mindful of cross-model effects, because the way we perceive and interpret information from one sense can be influenced by information coming from another sense. So in this paper, we wanted to look at the question of whether there are cross-model correspondences between 3D shapes, color, and emotions, independently of vision. Whether the way we feel objects, tangible objects, combine with color and influence our emotional judgments. So we started off from the Booba-Kiki paradigm with 3D printed Booba-like and Kiki-like shapes, and we varied them in terms of level of angularity and complexity. So we operationalized this in terms of the number of protruding points on the surface of the 3D printed object. We recruited 30 participants. We hid the objects away in a box, and so they couldn't see them, and asked them to feel the objects and then choose color from a palette of colors, and also adjust brightness, and also to assign an emotion in terms of an answer to the question, feeling these objects give me a sense of, and then choosing a term that captures the pleasure, arousal, and dominance emotion model. What did we find? In terms of colors, we found that rounder objects and less complex objects tend to be associated with higher brightness and the color blue, and angular objects and more complex objects tend to be associated with lower brightness and the color red. In terms of emotion, we found that rounder and less complex objects tend to be associated with high levels of pleasure, lower levels of arousal, and more of a sense of being in control. Whereas angular and more complex objects were most often associated with lower levels of pleasure, high levels of arousal, and more of a sense of being dominated or having a lack of control. Importantly, these findings contrast those reported from similar studies done with 2D shapes or 2D images. So this means that designers cannot simply extrapolate potential perceptual interpretive experiences that are elicited by 2D images to seemingly similar 3D tangible objects. So other principles are at play, and direct exploration can lead to undesirable outcomes. We extracted 4 association strategies using thematic analysis. One that often refers to geometric features explicitly, another that refers to familiar objects and familiar experiences, a third that relates to the personal sense of aesthetics or pleasantness, and a final one that looks at the coherence of choice within the boundaries of the experimental procedure itself. So based on these findings, we articulated the design space in the paper to help create tangible multisensory artifacts that can trigger specific emotional percepts. And with this, we think can help provide concrete actionable recommendations on how to exploit cross-model correspondences in HCI. That's it. Thank you.
With Oxfam Australia, we implemented the concept of programmable donations by trialling Smart Donations, a platform built on a private Ethereum blockchain that enables people to donate money to certain causes in response to real-world events. They could donate when an earthquake is detected, or when a petition receives signatures. They could donate when a cyclone forms, or when the temperature exceeds a monthly record, or whenever an activist tweets about refugees. The data comes directly from respected sources. For instance, earthquake insurance pulls data from the US Geological Survey that monitors international seismic events. Donors can choose a preset plan or customize a contract. They can set thresholds for seismic events, specify a region of the world, set one-off or recurring donations, set a time limit. If the conditions that the donor sets are not met by the time the contract expires, funds are returned to them. We trialled Smart Donations for 8 weeks with 86 participants, mostly in Australia, who set up contracts to be triggered at different thresholds and frequencies and over different durations. We collected analytics of their app usage, surveyed them before and afterwards, and interviewed 15 at the end. In this paper, we focus on participants' experiences of temporality. The inflexibility enforced by the contract prompts or intensifies emotional and moral ambiguities when donations do or do not result. When donations were made, users felt gratified and then guilty by the success of their contract design. When inactive contracts expires, users felt disappointed, then remorseful or relieved, and then frustrated or excited to set up another contract. But programming a smart donation does not simply mediate if a donation is made, but when it is made. Users are notified when the criteria they set are reached. For instance, for an earthquake contract, this user was first notified on the 29th of September when an earthquake was detected in Mexico at 10:21 Australia time. Participants have several distinct experiences of temporality while engaging with the app. An instant awareness of events and release of funds contributed to a sense of agency. Participants felt an immediacy in the tie between their donations to humanitarian crises and data about phenomena that caused them. This made them feel involved in emergency response. For some, the sense of involvement in causes was ongoing, and they suggested different ways that smart donations might map their donations to unfolding conditions and keep them aware of ongoing circumstances. Some differentiated between slow and rapid onset crises and said smart donations might sustain users' involvement in long-term change. The timing of when donations were triggered prompted awareness of situations far away, and some participants spoke of connections in a dynamic world through environmental changes like earth movements, through stories about beneficiaries. Such experiences challenge the prevailing paradigm for data and automation in digital financial services that infer frictionless transactions. Certainly, some participants didn't want to be notified when their donations were triggered, and potentially Smart Donations offers a convenient way to craft donations to be distributed in the background. But many welcome notifications, and their perspective on donating wasn't simply about efficiency. It seems to us they experienced right times to give. Aboriginal authors first introduced HCI to this term right time to describe the appropriate timing of cultural practices based on observing ecological, ancestral and other phenomena. Automation can reveal diverse temporal registers in real-world events, sociality, morality and everyday life. Appropriate juxtaposition of these registers through data, transactional rules, scheduling and predicting events contributes to experiencing right times. A sensitivity to right time, then, may help in designing for multiple temporalities in fintech.
Hello, thanks for attending our talk today. I'm going to talk to you about our paper, Security Notifications and Static Analysis Tools, Developers' Attitudes, Comprehension, and Ability to Act on Them. This work has been done in collaboration with Cami Vanier, Kosta Beznasov, and Maria Walters. So, what is the motivation behind this work? Despite tools' ability to scan code and detect some security vulnerabilities, we see security vulnerabilities continue to exist in computer programs, and some of them are common, such as hard-coded credentials and SQL injection. One type of tool that can assist developers in identifying security vulnerabilities uses a static analysis approach. Static analysis tools can find security vulnerabilities without needing to run it. On the right side, you can see an example of a security notification produced by a static analysis tool. This is an example of a hard-coded credential for establishing a connection to a database. We were keen to better understand the usability of security notifications in static analysis tools. Our research questions were around the effectiveness of security notifications, developers' attitude towards these notifications, and how the attitudes correlate with the ability to fix vulnerabilities. And finally, how do developers comprehend these security notifications in static analysis tools? We conducted an online between-subject experiment with 132 participants. We did both qualitative and quantitative analysis to answer our research questions. Our experiment included 4 types of common vulnerabilities: SQL injection, hard-coded credentials, sensitive data exposure, and symmetric encryption. We included notifications from 2 popular static analysis tools, SonarQube and Spotbox, and a control condition where we only showed participants a minimal notification with the line number of the vulnerability. In the experiment, participants first saw a code sample with a vulnerability, and then a notification from one of the conditions. This is an example from the control condition. As you can see, it only says there's a security vulnerability on line 14. In the 2 other conditions, a notification from either SonarQube or Spotbox was presented. Here you can see the example from the hard-coded credentials vulnerability from the SonarQube condition. Then we asked a multiple choice question where we presented 4 answer options and only one of them fixed the security vulnerability. For this talk, I'm going to talk about a few of our findings. Please read more about the details of our experiment, the setup, the analysis, and several other interesting findings in our paper. We observed that 110 participants were not able to find the correct answer for all the 4 vulnerabilities, and only 22 of our participants were able to find the correct answer for all the 4 vulnerabilities. As I said before, these vulnerabilities are common in software systems, and these tools can assist developers in finding them. So the problem is not only finding the vulnerability, but also presenting the information in a way that the developer can act on it. Here is another plot that shows the percentage of participants who answered correctly in a specific vulnerability type. We only observed a significant difference between participants' ability to identify the correct fix in the data exposure case. And in other cases, we didn't observe a significant difference. So having a minimal notification compared to a full notification provided by a static analysis tool did not significantly increase participants' ability to identify the correct fix in the 3 vulnerability types out of the 4 provided vulnerabilities. Overall, we find that static analysis tools have the potential to assist developers in fixing security vulnerabilities. However, with the current notifications, they may not be fully helping developers in fixing vulnerabilities. Please read more in our paper about the qualitative analysis of open answers that discusses participants' answers about their comprehension of the notifications, potential consequences of the vulnerabilities, and actions they would take after seeing the notifications. And also several in-depth discussion points, like including all types of developers when designing security notifications. Thank you very much for listening.
Hello everyone, my name is Kun-Ping Chen. Today I'm going to present our paper. It's a RAP. Theoretical wrapping of network visualizations supports cluster understanding tasks. This is joint work with Tim Dwyer and Kim Merritt from Monash University and Benjamin Beck from the University of Edinburgh. Traditional standard nodding representations of a network are known to produce a hairball for larger and denser networks. And thus, it makes the inspection of high-level network structures, such as clusters, difficult. One way to find better solutions to improve layer quality is to embed the network on the torus topology. This example is a simple network with a crossing. When laid out on a 3D torus, we can route the link 2 and 4 through the inner ring, and we can route the link between 3 and 5 through the outer ring. This avoids link crossing. Finally, we can slice it open and flatten it onto a 2D screen without crossing. In this work, we focus on the 2D torus representations of a network. Such torus layout diagram supports interactive panning. For example, when a user pans the diagram vertically, the network wraps around from top to bottom and vice versa. When the user pans the network pans the diagram horizontally, the network wraps around from left to right and vice versa. Note that our torus layout approach is different from existing pan and zone approach, which is commonly used in overview plus detailed exploration of networks. Such approach supports only panning of a zoomed area of a diagram. By contrast, our torus layout approach shows the entire network diagram at all times, while the network wraps around continuously when panned. One and others studied structure-aware fisheye views. They explicitly attempted to preserve high-level network structures while performing fisheye zooming. However, they did not attempt to untangle a network, nor did they conduct a perception test of network that forms a hyperstructure. This example shows a community structure of 5 clusters denoted by colors. A standard forest-directed representation of this network leads to a circular hypo, and it's hard to identify its cluster structures. Chen and others presented a torus layout algorithm for smaller and simpler networks. However, their approach in our evaluation, and we found that it has limited capability to untangle a network for larger and denser networks. We propose a refined torus layout algorithm that has better node separation for larger and denser networks. We adapt the existing stress minimization layout algorithm from Zane and others to considering a more complicated torus topology. The results show that our torus diagram makes clusters more distinct and more spread out. Furthermore, we propose an algorithm that automatically pans the diagram to find a viewport that minimizes the broken links. In a real-world example, such as football networks, our torus diagram provides a better use of available space and better separation between hub nodes. For recipe networks, our torus diagram makes it easier to find their 3 main clusters in the diagram. In an online controlled user study, we recruited 32 participants comparing torus and non-torus readability for larger and denser networks. Our results indicate that for cluster identification tasks, torus diagram with automatic panning significantly outperform standard unwrapped representations in terms of error. For node cluster tasks, our results indicate that torus diagram with automatic panning significantly outperform unwrapped representation in terms of time and error. Thank you. We are happy to take any questions.
Hello, thank you for attending our talk today. I'm going to talk about our paper, Privacy Champions in Software Teams, Understanding Their Motivations, Strategies, and Challenges. This work has been done in collaboration with Alyssa Frick and Camille Vanier. Prior research shows that developers don't often consider privacy in their design, and also they find it difficult to translate legal privacy requirements into technical requirements and implementations. Examples of privacy tasks include managing access control, handling privacy policies, and handling sensitive data. Literature also shows that organizational culture is a big factor in whether developers consider privacy in software development. So how can we move organizations towards privacy-friendly practices? In the information systems literature, champions are a type of people that advocate for a cause, an innovation, or a new idea and encourage others to engage with the new idea and also try to overcome the barriers that the new idea might face. The idea of using champions to promote a cause have been applied in software engineering, both in promoting security practices and also introducing new software technologies. We were keen to better understand how can we apply this concept in the privacy domain. We define privacy champions as someone in a software team who formally or informally promotes best practices for user privacy and educates others about privacy. Overall, they act as the voice of users' privacy. We built our research questions to better understand the motivations of these people, what challenges they face, and what do they find rewarding or frustrating. We were also keen to understand their strategies and channels they use for promoting user privacy, and also how do they keep up with the latest in privacy. We asked software development teams to nominate someone who they think they consider as a privacy champion because we were interested in people who are seen as a privacy champion by others. We interviewed 12 privacy champions and we analyzed the interviews with 2 coders. I'm going to talk about a few of our findings in this presentation. Please read more about the full details of our findings and discussion points in the paper. We find that privacy champions find it difficult to overcome with a negative privacy culture and the I have got nothing to hide attitude. When there are other business priorities, or it is difficult to say when it is enough for privacy because of the lack of standardizations, evaluation metrics, and automated privacy tools, it is again difficult for privacy champions to argue for privacy. Some of the effective strategies that privacy champions employ to promote privacy in software teams are having regular privacy-focused meetings and informal discussions, like water cooler discussions with their colleagues. They ask for management support and they facilitate communication between different stakeholders, for example, between the product and the legal teams. They also try to incorporate privacy considerations into design reviews. Some of the strategies that privacy champions do not find effective are punishing developers for not doing privacy, or just having company-wide privacy awareness programs for new hires. We provide several points for companies that would like to attract and support privacy champions, for example, by embedding privacy values in the organizational culture, and also compensating privacy champions extra time and effort by perhaps acknowledging their efforts and also by monetary compensation. Please read more about how privacy champions conceptualize privacy, what are their motivations, and what they find rewarding in promoting privacy, as well as in-depth discussion points about how to best support privacy champions and embed privacy in software teams. Thank you very much for listening.
Hi, my name is Susan Lechelt, and today I'll be sharing our work on EvalMe, which is a system with a tangible interface designed to help students and instructors evaluate and reflect on learning experiences together. So this work was carried out together with my co-authors Frederick Broody, Nikolai Marquardt, and Yvonne Rogers at University College London and the University of Edinburgh. So asking students to reflect on their learning experience and their understanding of pedagogical content is a really important part of the learning process. But methods of eliciting reflection that are most widely adopted, like surveys and post-tests, can miss important aspects of the learning experience. And this is because students can forget how they felt or what they learned at specific points in time. At the same time, with these methods, students are not often given the opportunity to discuss together with their peers how their experience and understanding changed throughout a learning session. So the key questions we sought to answer in this research were, might there be alternative approaches that are both lightweight and enjoyable to use, and which can support more in-depth individual reflection and shared reflection among students? And if so, what are the practical and pragmatic considerations of using them in real learning environments? So to address these questions, we chose to adopt a research through design approach, which had 4 stages. First, we conceptualized an evaluation system with a tangible interface within our team of academics. Second, we co-designed the system with 2 different groups of expert educational workshop leaders. Third, we co-developed EvalMe. And fourth, we used it in 3 educational workshop settings for 12 to 14-year-old students. And these workshops were run by our co-design partners with EvalMe used as their evaluation method. So we described the first 2 stages of our process at length in the paper, and these led to a number of important findings about practical and pragmatic considerations of using an in-situ evaluation tool in learning environments. So, for example, insights into what types of questions to ask students and how often, as well as how to introduce a novel evaluation tool while keeping the students and instructors' focus on the learning content. And I would encourage you to look at the paper for those insights, but for the rest of the talk, I'll focus on our development of EvalMe and our findings from the workshops. So at its core, Evalme comprises a tangible interface, which we call the Evalme Sender, and the desktop application. The Evalme Sender is passed around the classroom at different points during a learning session, and students use it to input their answers to 3 different questions, which are decided on by a teacher. Students input their responses to the questions through turning a rotary encoder and lighting up corresponding LED lights on an LED ring. The design allows for asking for responses to questions or statements that ask for a level of agreement. For example, I'm having fun, as well as multiple choice questions. The sender can work with or without requiring students to authenticate their identity through personal RFID tags. And once satisfied, the students submit their answer and then pass the sender on to the next student. And when they do so, their submitted data is immediately wirelessly transmitted to the desktop application. The form factor of the Evalme sender was designed so that students could hide their responses from others, or also to make them visible to those around them. And the aim of this was to encourage them to congregate around the tangible interface and discuss their answers to the questions together when submitting responses. So on the desktop app, instructors manage the question sets, and this is also where the children's aggregate responses to the questions over time are visualized. For example, looking at the yellow bar charts in the image here, we see how the students' responses to the statement, "I have the strong understanding of this topic," changed each time the device was passed around throughout the learning session. The application is designed to enable these visualizations to also be displayed back to the students on a large screen in order to also facilitate group discussion at the end of the learning session. So we used Evalme in 3 educational workshops, which were all between 2 and 5 hours long, and all included 12 to 14-year-old students. All workshops were led by our co-design partners, and the co-design partners led both the learning content and developed the questions to be used with the Evalme related, and the questions that they developed related to learning outcomes, the students' level of engagement, and the students' perceptions of the learning content. So just to highlight a few key findings, we found that the students spent a lot of time reflecting on their responses to the questions and hesitating before submitting their responses. And our observations of how the students interacted with the Evalme sender really compellingly showed how its physical form factor transformed the task of entering data input into one that was more embodied and evocative than, for example, answering questions on paper might be. We also found that when Evalme was passed around, its physical presence provided a place around which the students could congregate, and this in turn prompted the students to talk about what responses they had selected and why. So this kind of physical presence made the process of evaluation a shared, connected activity that the students could choose to complete together. So in terms of the data that was collected, the data was perceived to be really valuable by the instructors, especially for informing their pedagogical practice. But getting the children to reflect on their aggregate responses, as visualized through the bar charts that we created, was quite tricky. And based on our work, more work is required to understand how to scaffold students' interpretations of how their aggregate learning and experiences evolve over time. So, in sum, our paper explores the value and pragmatic considerations of using new technologies for supporting gathering and discussing reflective data in real learning environments, and we hope you give it a read for more information. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to our presentation, The Public Life of Data, investigating reactions to visualizations on Reddit. My name is Tobias Kauer, and this paper was written by Aaron Ridley, Marion Dirk, Benjamin Bach, and me. With our research, we want to better understand how people express their reactions to visualizations. Prior work has studied how experts use, for example, visualization annotation to achieve a shared goal like decision-making or participatory sense-making. However, visualization reaches ever-widening and increasingly diverse audiences with individual opinions and personal perspectives on the data. So we are interested how these public audiences react to visualizations in the wild. We look at reactions of non-experts who do not share a goal when engaging with visualizations. Better understanding these audiences is key to understand how visualizations are used, how they can contribute to productive discussions, and what harm they can potentially cause. In our study, we look at audience reactions on Reddit. The subforum Data is Beautiful is a community of about 50 million people where visualizations are created, posted, and discussed by the members. We collected textual reactions on 20 popular visualizations and classified them using a grounded theory approach. We found 10 distinct reaction types that refer to 4 different scopes or basically areas of a visualization post.
Among them were reactions like observations, conclusions, or hypotheses. These primarily express how people make sense of the data, and they have been discussed in prior work on social analysis and participatory sense-making. Sense-making is also connected to clarifications, where people ask about details in a post they don't fully understand, and usually they get further explanations by other members of the audience. And this audience also provides additional information like background knowledge, trivia information, or links to reading material to further contextualize information that is displayed in the visualization. I want to talk more specifically about two groups of reactions. On the one hand, people express critique about the visualization and its data. They criticize, for example, misleading encodings, and they provide proposals how to improve this problem. More interestingly, people call out missing or plainly wrong data, and with that, they help the broader audience who reads their comments to understand possible issues of data quality. The most interesting reactions to us were testimonies and opinions. Here, the reactions differ greatly from prior studies because in them, people position themselves according to their cultural, political, or social identity. Particularly in testimonies, people provide personal stories or biographic anecdotes, and with that, they basically connect a relatable human story to the data that is visible in the visualization. To better understand why people react, we did a follow-up survey to investigate people's motivation and identified 9 engagement drivers in 2 groups. On the one hand, people express personal perspectives and experiences. They share opinions or emotions, and they point out what is interesting to them. They add anecdotal evidence, and even more analytical reactions are used to match existing knowledge with the visualized data. They basically compare what they already know and what they see in the visualization. On the other hand, people are well aware that their reaction informs a public discourse, and therefore they have an impact on how this data is discussed or made sense of, and what additional information the wider audience gets to contextualize the presented data. So what can we do with this knowledge? Our results help understand the role of personal perspectives on data, and they pose challenges for future participatory visualization interfaces. For example, how can type-specific annotations be used to better capture nuances of reactions like critiques, clarifications, or contextualizations? What is the potential of audience-driven storytelling, where people contribute personal stories and testimonies to a visualization, and thus they add a subjective perspective to data that is otherwise considered raw or neutral? And how can we use audience engagement to visualize the discourse around the data and guide people's attention to areas that are highly debated or commented on? With that, I'm looking forward to your questions, and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
We present a study of 2 tangible interactive museum exhibits where we focused on the distribution of control of the exhibits and the role it played in companions' social activities while using the exhibit. If we think about why we go to museums, it can be for educational reasons, to see an exhibition or artifacts, or because we're tourists on our holidays. But a museum visit is a highly social experience. People often go to the museum with their family or friends to spend quality time with them, and even visiting alone, other people in the museum influence our experience. As technology is increasingly adopted by cultural heritage venues to communicate narratives about their collections, we question how such exhibits may support the social aspect of the visit for companions. Providing multiple controllers for several people to interact simultaneously is one way to support multiple users interacting with the exhibit, but this does not always facilitate social interaction between companions while using the exhibit. With this in mind, the focus of our research is on the distribution of control of the exhibits and the role it plays in companions' social and shared interactions while they use the exhibits. We studied visitors' interactions at 2 exhibits at the Riverside Museum in Glasgow using video audio recordings to capture visitors' interactions and behaviours. Our findings are focused on the analysis of 17 groups, 9 at one exhibit and 8 groups at another exhibit. The exhibits we focused on are called the Glenn Douglas and the Firefighter exhibit. Looking at the social activities visitors engaged in, we observed visitors coordinating their actions with their companions, such as relaying information from one part of the exhibit to companions located at another part of the exhibit, and their companions using this information to interact with particular controllers. We also saw visitors stop using controllers, turn their attention towards their companions, and ask their companions to interact with the controllers they have access to. A highly social activity to stop interacting and turn attention towards others and ask them to interact. Another social activity was particular movement patterns between companions over the course of the time they spent at the exhibit. For example, stepping away from controllers are starting to look at the rest of the exhibit and mediate their companions' interaction with the exhibit. This created opportunities for others to physically interact with the exhibit and situations where visitors shared the same controller back and forth with each other. The movement patterns suggested there were understated positions of control that visitors moved to after first using a more obvious interaction point. We suggest these social interactions and ways companions shared interaction were underpinned by the distribution of control at the exhibits. Focusing on the distribution of control, we identified 4 ways or mechanisms which distributed control. A physical distribution of control, in that there was more than one physical controller which were physically separated over a large distance. A temporal distribution of control, in that the use of certain controllers was appropriate and inappropriate at particular moments during the use of the exhibit. A functional distribution of control, in that different controllers manipulated the exhibit in different ways. And an indirect distribution of control, where companions verbally influence their companions' interaction with the exhibit. So these are the 4 ways that we've identified control is distributed at these exhibits. We suggest these are considerations when designing to support co-participation, shared interaction and social interaction between companions at interactive exhibits that have multiple controllers. In our discussion, we talk about the interaction with the exhibit being distributed among group members in a way that led to alternating sequential interaction, referring back and forth between each other using the different controllers and resources, rather than individuals interacting with the exhibit in a more independent way simultaneously. This created an interaction where companions relied upon each other, presenting opportunities to support each other and encouraging visitors to focus beyond themselves. The exhibits presented visitors with alternative perspectives and positions to engage with, swapping positions with companions. There appeared to be desirable positions visitors were initially drawn to, and understated positions of control, which we argue supported parents' inclusion in physical interaction and encouraged movements to other parts of the exhibit. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your questions or comments.
This research is about the art of sketchnoting and was done as a collaborative project between UCL, ETH, University of Toronto, University of Edinburgh, and Microsoft Research. In sketchnotes, people visualize ideas by combining hand-drawn text, pictures, and diagrams into expressive visual notes. This enables to focus on the content, digest it through active listening, and render its essence onto the page. Sketchnotes are often created in real time, such as during talks or lectures, and can act as a tangible and often artful summary of the most important takeaway messages. To better understand sketchnoting practices, we collected a corpus of 103 sketchnotes and analyzed them together with 6 interviews of experienced sketchnoters. In our findings, we distilled core sketchnote components, design space, and sketchnoting strategies. And our analysis also inspired a list of suggestions for the design of future digital inking tools. Sketchnotes are composed of elements in 4 categories: content, layout, structuring, and styling. The level of detail of written text ranges from full sentences all the way to catchphrases or key terms, and this can also include quotes or speech bubbles emphasizing important parts. What makes sketchnotes different from traditional written notes is the presence of graphical content to supplement the text. Most sketchnotes therefore contain symbols or pictograms such as objects, signs, and shapes as annotations or to represent important concepts. Other visual elements include drawings of people, such as a person giving a talk, custom illustration of different situations, diagrams about a process or design space, or elements to make a structure emerge and organizing content in higher level blocks. Overall, we identified a rich design space of different types of sketchnotes. For example, the layout and visual style of sketchnotes vary greatly. Some sketchnotes are free-form pieces of information, others are organized as a mind map, grid structure, or linear format similar to comics. Further high-level dimensions of the design space include the level of conciseness, illustration, personification, visual cohesion, and craftsmanship. Through our study, we also gained insights into the strategies creators apply when drawing their sketchnotes, and we organized those into 5 themes. The first set of strategies is about capturing ideas through concise text, quotes, and visuals. We also discussed the emergence of themes and crafting of explanatory illustrations. Second, sketchnoters use visual strategies to embellish their designs, often emphasizing key concepts, and this is also done by conveying the same concept in multiple forms or by contrasting the type of content or varying style. Third, skilled sketchnoters create a narrative by providing visual elements indicating the flow and suggesting a reading order, or by adding a visual narrator connecting to the audience by depicting the character's emotions. Fourth, sketchnoters develop different techniques to refine the aesthetics of their sketches, often conveying a unique visual identity, making their style recognizable and memorable. It is often transcribed by the visual cohesion and composition of sketchnotes, giving them a unique visual identity. And you can see many of these examples in the corpus of sketchnotes with our paper. Finally, the 5th set of strategies have to do with the constraints of live drawing. For example, people may run out of space and need to make addendums in different places. People may also revisit earlier content to finish it when there is a small break during the talk. Overall, studying this corpus of sketchnotes, complemented through our interviews, allowed us to uncover nuances of people's rich practices of sketchnoting. And we see a wealth of future work in HCI to bring digital sketchnoting to a wider audience. For example, we can envision multimodal techniques to help with capturing content and AI-driven approaches to suggest simple icons and elements of sketches. We can also think of many interaction techniques to help complete the drawing, moving content around or restyling sketches. Digital software can support a more flexible creation process by adding layers as in graphics editing tools, for example, enabling to dissociate content from styling. Making digital sketchnoting tools can lower the barrier of entry, and in the future you may produce a beautiful sketchnote with limited drawing knowledge. This is our goal and inspiration, bringing sketchnotes to everyone.
Hi, Kai. I am really excited to give you all a brief overview of our paper, Getting Ourselves Together, Epistemic Burden in Data-Centered Participatory Design Research. I'm Jennifer Peer, and I'm a researcher at Google, and I'm presenting today on behalf of myself and my co-authors, Dr. Roderick Crooks from the University of California, Irvine, Dr. Morgan Curry from the University of Edinburgh, Dr. Britt Paris from Rutgers University, and Dr. Irene Pescetto from University of Michigan. So in our paper, we use the concept of epistemic burden as a tool for highlighting the types of research harm that can take place in participatory design research, especially when this work engages with minoritized communities and activists using a data-centered approach. We really see this as contributing to the intersection of HCI and data justice. We see this also as building on a lineage of recent excellent work in the HCI space, highlighting some of the different harms around extraction and potential challenges in really serving and equitably partnering with the groups that we're intending to serve and collaborate with. Epistemic burden is a concept that really pulls together multiple related ideas around the way in which privileged groups further injustice and potential exploitation through the relationships with oppressed and marginalized community groups. There are 3 major outcomes that come out of epistemic burden. The first is diverting energy away from ongoing activities among community groups and minoritized communities to educate
the privileged. The second is responding to stories of the oppressed with hostility. So this is not just outright hostility or explicit hostility, but also things like undue skepticism or distrust. And lastly, receiving social recognition from dedication to dismantling oppression over the channeling and funneling of that recognition to the affected groups. Our research questions for this work ask how we as academics and design researchers can avoid perpetuating the cycle of burdening community organizations through our approaches to data-centered design research. So this really entails how we can use the concept of epistemic burden to proactively help us identify the different types of harms that can take place in participatory design research agendas, and how we can analyze epistemic burden to steer our approach to the least harmful, most appropriate methods. We use 2 case studies to answer these questions. And they serve as empirical evidence of epistemic burden at work and the potential of epistemic exploitation, as well as an opportunity for experiential reflection and interpretation. So the first case study we investigate in our work is the UCLA POIH project, or Police Officer Involved Homicide Project, which was a hackathon held at UCLA to investigate gaps in official records of police data. Some of the key tensions that we saw here were that we as researchers set the agenda and assumed that data was at the center. And in retrospect, this really clashed with the distrust that we saw in community groups around the official data records and the use of data for different means. So we see this as really encapsulating the first 2 types of epistemic burden. So driving attention and energy and resources away for some of the ongoing work that really didn't have to do with data-centered approaches or data-centered work, and a minimizing of the actual existing distrust among those community groups around even the work of completing or helping to resolve gaps in official data records. So considering that and reflecting on that, what could we have done differently? We could have let the organizations set and lead the project agenda, which would have included aligning all together on definitions and values of data, particularly and crucially including a grappling of data non-use and the appropriateness of that in different ways, as well as working more concretely towards ongoing goals and existing work within those communities. The Uci Database Project was an NSF-funded undergraduate project that was towards the goal of building up a database of data justice grassroots organizations. And some of the key tensions that we saw here were not enough credit explicitly for sharing and producing data and the work entailed within that. And that paired really with insufficient follow-up after initial interviews to really provide a substantive way of balancing the types of gains, especially material gains that were being experienced by both members of this partnership, so both community organizations and the researchers engaging in this work. And this really speaks to and symbolizes the third type of epistemic burden, which really explains the type of unbalanced recognition that can be brought forth through epistemic burden in this type of work. So what could we have done differently here is add organizations and organizers as co-authors and presenters, and really citing their work and data as they desire and with appropriate consent, as well as ensuring that there is a substantive way to bring forth material gains and balance the type of recognition that different players within this partnership are gaining through things like writing organizational funding directly into proposals and offering things like free grant writing training to groups. So to summarize, we see epistemic burden as a theoretical tool for identifying work that's needed before engaging in data-centered participatory design research to take a proactive stance to avoid perpetuating cycles of extraction and harm and focus instead on minimizing burden. Thank you.